Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and I hope you enjoy the journey. In this episode, we're diving into a tale of roads not taken, or perhaps roads that might never become reality, depending on who you ask. Today, we're dissecting Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's ambitious yet contentious Crossroads for Peace project. It's like the construction version of a drama series, only with more geopolitics and fewer catchy theme songs. So how realistic is the ambitious plan of Mr. Pashinyan, and to what extent could Turkey and Azerbaijan either make or break it? We'll get to that, but first let's take a look at a breakthrough event that took place in the Caucasus just the other day.
In a significant geopolitical shift, Armenia has announced its intention to distance itself from its long-standing military and trade alliance with Russia. This move comes amid Armenians' growing interest in fostering closer relations with the European Union.
Our relations are developing in a positive track, that they are stronger than ever, and that there is a mutual interest to advance them further.
Since the beginning of the year, Armenia has been gradually withdrawing from its cooperation with Russia. On April 17th, Russian tanks were observed retreating from the Nagorno-Karabakh region. These forces were initially scheduled to remain until 2025. Approximately 2,000 troops have been stationed in Nagorno-Karabakh since 2020, under a trilateral agreement between Azerbaijan, Armenia and Russia. Tensions between Armenia and Moscow have been escalating since September of the previous year, when Azerbaijan recaptured the predominantly Armenian-inhabited region of Nagorno-Karabakh, located in the South Caucasus, despite the presence of Russian peacekeeping forces. The Azerbaijani offensive led to a mass exodus of the indigenous population of Armenia, with no intervention from the Russian side.
After threatening to do so for years, Azerbaijan has completed the ethnic cleansing of the region and is now consolidating it by systematically erasing all traces of ethnic Armenians' presence, including Armenian cultural and religious heritage.
Armenians, predominantly Christians, claim to have been present in the area for several centuries, dating back to pre-Christian times. Conversely, Azerbaijan, whose population is mainly Muslim, assert deep historical ties to the region. The bloody conflict between the two nations has been persisting for over a century. Following the ethnic cleansing of Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh, the president of the separatist region, Samuel Sahakian, signed a decree to dissolve all structures. According to him, Nagorno-Karabakh was to cease to exist by January 1, 2024. After years of conflict, the area has been occupied by Azerbaijan.
And now, as always, it's time to take a look at the issue in greater detail. On one side, we have Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan waving the blueprint for a new transportation route through Armenia, aiming to transform this small, landlocked country into a major transit hub connecting east and west. Sounds great on paper, right? But here's the problem. Neither Azerbaijan nor Turkey, the two other key players in this saga, were consulted. That's a bit like planning a party at your neighbor's house without telling them. Surprise! On the 5th of April, European bigwigs Ursula von der Leyen and US Secretary of State Antony Blinken gave their thumbs up to this plan in Brussels. You might think that's all the endorsement you need, right? But hold your horses, or in this case, your cargo trucks. The day after their support was announced, Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev was busy discussing the Zangezur corridor with his Turkish counterpart, a project that directly competes with Pashinyan's vision. Now, if this were a chess game, Azerbaijan and Turkey are saying check without even looking at Armenia's part of the board. The Zangezur corridor would reconnect Azerbaijan with its exclave, Nakhchivan, slicing right through Armenia. Yet Armenia's new plan includes a rail line parallel to this, but suggests different paths for the roadways, much to Baku's chagrin. Azerbaijan's Aliyev has made it clear, no Zangezur corridor, no open borders, period. It's their way or no highway, literally. And then there is this, the expected deployment of Russian guards to oversee these corridors. Now that is a major issue, isn't it? That's right, Russia's boots on Armenian soil, possibly checking your passport and waving through your shipments. Not exactly music to Western ears, right? Speaking of regulations, Baku wants a freeway with no stops, no customs, no checks for cargo zipping between mainland Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan. Armenia, not so much on board with turning their territory into a toll-free zone. Let's cut through the diplomatic language. Azerbaijan calls the Armenian plan an empty declaration. Harsh, but not unexpected. The proposed Armenian-Iran rail link, which runs through Azerbaijani territory, is a potential economic lifeline that doesn't quite tie up without Baku's nod. Meanwhile, Moscow, ever the helpful neighbor, insists on its version of customs checks, perhaps hoping to keep a finger in the pie. The grand takeaway from this is that with Baku and Ankara doubling down on their Zangezur corridor and Armenia trying to pave its own way without opening the road Baku wants, the Crossroads for peace might remain a roadmap without an actual road. And now, joining us to discuss these matters and more is our guest today, Dr. Konrad Zasztoft, Faculty of the Oriental Studies at the University of Warsaw. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So let's begin with the Zangezur corridor. Do you think this dispute is a bona fide clash of concepts when it comes to transportation, logistics and so on? Or is one of the parties there looking for an excuse? I mean, if the railway line is staying the same, it's only about the roads, how genuine is this dispute when it comes to Armenia and Azerbaijan? Is one of them just trying to show all the others around that, you know, we have good intentions, but it's the other side that just doesn't want to be flexible?
Let's start with the explanation. What is the Zangezur corridor? So it's a small part of Armenia's territory, which is dividing two parts of Azerbaijani territory. And the logical need of Azerbaijan is to have this communication between the two parts of this country. But of course, the problem is bigger. It's related to the whole Azeri-Armenian conflict related to Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, of course, Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is, we can consider somehow it ended with the exodus of Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh and full control which Azerbaijan took over this region. But then we have other problems related to delimitation of the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So Zangezur corridor is only one of those problems between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and I think it's really something which is practically needed for both Armenia and Azerbaijan, and also Turkey, to open this corridor and also other communications in the region. But for now, I think it's a topic which is used also for other reasons in these bigger negotiations between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
So Armenia wants what it calls the Crossroads for peace, right? Azerbaijan has a slightly different design. It really wants to have, for example, certain incentives for those traveling between Nakhchivan and the rest of Azerbaijan. They don't want any sort of customs duties and all that. So which of these two countries really has the leverage here? Which one is the one demanding and setting conditions, and which one is really in a position which makes it, if not precarious, but at least more difficult to get what it wants in these negotiations, really? Would I be correct in assuming that Armenia isn't holding all the cards here?
Yeah, obviously, Azerbaijan, the country which won the war with Armenia, is setting conditions here. And that's why there is this condition of Azerbaijan to have no customs on this way between Azerbaijan and Azerbaijani exclave Nakhchivan, which is unacceptable from the point of view of Yerevan. Moreover, Yerevan fears that it will be something like an exterritorial corridor of Azerbaijan, so it will. So Armenia fears it will lose control over this territory, and this territory, of course, is important for Armenia because it's also for Armenia. It's also the corridor to Iran, which is an important neighbor of Armenia. Actually, one of the few friendly countries in the region for Armenia. Yes, as I said before, it's a part of this bigger negotiations between Yerevan and Baku, and it's the question of Zangezur corridor. It's not only related to the Zangezur corridor itself.
And of course, if anyone mentions an exterritorial corridor, even if this is just a figure of speech, it certainly doesn't bring back good memories, especially if you live in Central and Eastern Europe. Now, moving on, you've already mentioned a very important thing here, that, this is a dispute concerning transportation, infrastructure, customs. This is just a part of a bigger problem. These two countries are not exactly on friendly terms. And now, the recapturing of Nagorno-Karabakh by Azerbaijan, regardless of its legal status, right, because it legally belonged to Azerbaijan under international law, this did not exactly make matters easier, quite the opposite. Would you say that Armenia has a point if it says, look, there has been ethnic cleansing there? Sometimes they even say it was genocide. Very strong words, but do they have any sort of substantial backing, so to say, in the existing legal framework? Do they qualify as such, or are they just rhetorical statements made for the general public?
Well, this is a difficult question. Definitely, I wouldn't use the word genocide. That was a tragic event. The exodus of Karabakh Armenians in September last year. Some people died in this process. Of course, they lost their property. So this is a tragedy. This is also something which Armenia will, of course, have to raise this issue now and in the future as well. But for now, the reality is that Azerbaijan is a stronger side here and probably the strongest power in the region.
When it comes to Armenia's alignment, could it actually result in a major shift, as you said, because Armenia, they were technically pushed out of this alliance with Russia. This alliance has completely failed. They were expecting the CSTO to become involved. They were expecting some sort of major support from the Russian side. They didn't get any of that. So they are really moving in the only direction they seem to have, for the time being at least. How do you think this is going to end, both for them and for Azerbaijan? Is Azerbaijan likely to move closer to not only Turkey, but perhaps in some way to the Russian Federation, given that there are some non-democratic proclivities there? Or would that be just, going out on a limb, saying too much? And is it basically the case of these countries likely to remain more or less the same, but just drifting in their separate directions? How would you say? Was it going to be a revolutionary change or more of an evolution, a gradual one?
Well, I expect more evolutionary change, and I hope it will be more evolutionary, because what kind of revolution we can expect here? The revolution may be even bigger war in the region. So obviously we don't want to see it there. And regarding Russia, I think Russia has not many leverages now to to have impact on the situation on the ground. Of course, Moscow is very angry about statements of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, Armenian Prime Minister, who is saying that Armenia wants to quit the Collective Security Treaty Organization and many other statements about the European Union. But Moscow, at this point, cannot do anything about Armenia, anything significant, because even in the economic sphere, Armenia is dependent on Russia. But now Russia became also dependent on Armenia, because Armenia is the country which is a corridor for Russia for the re-export of Western products. So I think the biggest threat at this point for Armenia is, of course, Azerbaijan. But I think Baku is also not interested in bigger war. I think some aggressive steps from the side of Azerbaijan. This is more like a part of negotiation, part of pressure on Yerevan to have a better result from the point of Azerbaijan in these peace negotiations.
So all in all, a negotiation tactic. Unfortunately, we don't have time to talk more about Azerbaijan because once again, it's a country that also plays a major role in the region. The best option, obviously, would be for both these countries to be aligned with the West. And since we have Greece and Turkey being in the same military bloc, well, that's not exactly impossible, although wouldn't be an easy task to achieve either. Dr. Konrad Zasztoft was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, bringing you all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. The Kremlin has expressed reservations about French President Emmanuel Macron's proposal for an Olympic truce during the upcoming Paris Olympics. The suggestion, which aims to halt international conflicts for the duration of the Games, was met with a lukewarm response from Moscow.
Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that Russian President Vladimir Putin and the military are wary of Macron's proposal, fearing that Ukraine might exploit the pause in hostilities to regroup and rearm. While Peskov stopped short of outright rejecting the idea of a ceasefire, he noted that no formal steps towards such an agreement have been taken. The concept of an Olympic truce harks back to ancient traditions, and President Macron has been vocal about his desire to see it implemented in current conflict zones, including Ukraine, Gaza and Sudan. Macron plans to enlist the support of Chinese President Xi Jinping, who is scheduled to visit Paris soon. The International Olympic Committee has faced criticism for allowing Russian athletes to compete in the Paris Olympics under a neutral flag, despite condemning Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Ukrainian officials and the foreign ministers of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania have expressed deep concern over the IOC's decision, which they view as an affront to the victims of the conflict.
According to Russian Supreme Court data, there has been a significant surge in the number of Russian soldiers convicted of murder in 2023. Russian courts also handed down a record number of convictions for espionage, state treason, and disclosure of state secrets.
In 2023, 116 contract soldiers and conscripts were sentenced for premeditated murder, marking a stark increase from the 13 and 21 soldiers convicted in the years 2021 and 2022 respectively. In a parallel uptick, Russian courts recorded an unprecedented number of convictions for espionage, state treason and the disclosure of state secrets, the highest since 2010. Last year, 9 individuals were sentenced for espionage, 39 for treason, and 73 for disclosing state secrets. The rise in convictions coincides with the ongoing military aggression against Ukraine. The period of 2022 to 2023 saw Russia intensively recruit from prisons in order to strengthen the forces in Ukraine. Convicts were offered pardons in exchange for military service, a practice that has been gradually replaced by conditional release for the duration of the conflict. In a controversial move, President Vladimir Putin enacted a law in March this year that permits suspected or convicted criminals to serve in the military, further blurring the lines between criminal justice and military service amidst a backdrop of increasing international scrutiny.
Ukraine's population has dwindled to a mere 29 million last year, marking the lowest birth rate in the nation's 300-year recorded history. The country recorded only 187,000 births, including those in Russian-occupied territories, signaling a deepening demographic crisis.
The ongoing war in Ukraine has triggered a massive refugee crisis, with an estimated 8 million Ukrainians fleeing since the Russian invasion in 2022. A study by Ukraine's Institute for Future last year reported a population of only 29 million, with many refugees showing no intention of returning home. The roots of the crisis trace back to the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, when Ukraine boasted a population of almost 52 million. Since then, a combination of economic instability and labor migration has seen the total fertility rate collapse to 1.4 births per woman by 2022, with projections suggesting a further decline. Ukraine's population figures have been speculative for years, with President Volodymyr Zelensky's promise of 2020 census materializing only electronically last year. The annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014 further reduced the population count by approximately 4 million. The combination of low fertility, conflict and mass immigration paints a grim picture for Ukraine's demographic future.
In a rather remarkable shift of geopolitical alliances, the United States has announced plans to provide substantial military assistance to Armenia, a nation that until recently was considered a close strategic partner of Russia. This move could signify a cautious yet significant effort by Washington to redraw the geopolitical contours in the volatile Caucasus region.
The pivot of Armenia towards the west comes after a period of political and economic estrangement from Moscow, following a devastating military defeat in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. The sentiment in Yerevan is one of disillusionment with the Kremlin, which is perceived to have renegated on its security promises. In response, the European Union and the United States have swiftly offered a lifeline, with a combined aid package exceeding $350 million aimed at bolstering Armenia's security and economy. In a recent interview, U.S. Ambassador to Armenia Kristina Kvin highlighted the burgeoning relationship between the two nations, noting a comprehensive expansion in bilateral cooperation over the past year. This includes a notable increase in military collaboration, exemplified by joint military exercises and the impending assignment of U.S. military advisor to assist the Armenian Defense Ministry with capacity-building reforms. The announcement of the EU-US aid package was met with sharp criticism from Russia and Azerbaijan. However, Armenian Prime Minister Pashinyan has attempted to mitigate concerns, asserting that Armenia's burgeoning ties with the West are not intended to undermine its regional relationships.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.